everyone, welcome back to Kevin Reviews. I just rewatched Spider-Man 3, the last in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogies by Columbia Pictures again and Marvel Entertainment. Directed by Sam Raimi, written by Sam Raimi, also written by Raimi, I'm guessing his brother. And this is also written by Alvin Sargent. The cast includes returning Tobey Maguire, Kristen Dunst, James Franco, as well as others, including J.K. Simmons, and then we have newcomers, including Topher Grace, Thomas Haden Church, and Bryce Dallas Howard. So I don't know if I can really say add anything new to um, what's been said before about Spider-Man 3, because ever since the sequel, the Spider-Man 2, it was a huge hit and is often like on people's top 10 favorite Spider-Man films. Um, there were people hoping, there were trailers about, Venom coming out, and everyone was like excited that we get to see Venom on the big screen. And this was way before, sorry, I had to burp a little bit. And we were excited to have, Venom appearing before um before later when Sony did their own Venom version with oh, why is his name blanking on me? I'll put it likely here, but I think many people know about the the Sony's version of Venom, where they made him to an anti-hero. So, but yeah, people were looking forward to it. But once the film released, it was not a great. It wasn't considered great. It was the weakest of the Spider-Man trilogy. And there's a reason, because there's a lot of studio meddling, from what I understand. Even Sam Raimi didn't want Venom in the film, but he was pressured to. I think because of Avid Rod, he was a producer. Um, because Venom is one of the biggest Spider-Man villains ever, and yet, but Sam Raimi didn't want to do that because he didn't quite understand it. But he did later, kind of, when he looked it up, thought it was interesting. But he already had a plan going with the Sandman, and whatnot. So there didn't seem to be any to point to it. But unfortunately, because of studio meddling, the film suffered, and I'll get into that later. Even heard there was Kristen Dunst was just done with the Spider-Man films. I think even Tobey Maguire was kind of done with them, wanted to move on to other things. Um, let's see. The film also it did reuse a lot of Kristen Dunst screaming from the previous films. I think mainly from Spider-Man 2, but also probably likely Spider-Man 3, Spider-Man 1. So a lot of the screams that she does in the film are not on her own. They were clips, um, audio recordings left over from those past films. So yeah, this film did struggle and suffer, unfortunately. But I think it. I don't think it failed necessarily, nor do I think people say it's it's one of the worst. I think some people would look at later when the Andrew Garfield film comes out, Amazing Spider-Man 2, as the worst, but then I don't know for sure because I've never seen Amazing Spider-Man 2. But it but that and the Spider-Man 3 suffer the same problems. So, yeah, we it didn't live up to expectations. The studio meddling kind of ruined things for everybody, including Sam Raimi, who did plan to do a Spider-Man 4. And yet, here we are with this average Spider-Man film, average or slightly above average Spider-Man film, depending on how you view it. And I think gave a hint about it, what my thoughts are. But in any case, let's get on my review with Spider-Man 3. So the story in Spider-Man 3 is quite a lot. After the events of Spider-Man 2, um, Peter Parker, played by Tobey Maguire, is now, you know, everything's looking up for him. he's now with his girlfriend. He's now with his girlfriend Mary Jane Watson, played by Kristen Dunst, and he's still everyone seems to love Spider-Man. There's less of the newspaper saying he's a menace. It seems to be. I don't know why they kind of stopped doing that, but suffice to say that he's well loved by everybody. But things start to change, especially when Harry's come back into play. Because again, spoiler warning if you've not seen Spider-Man 1 or 2, Harry blames Peter for killing his dad, when in reality, um, uh, when his dad was killed by his own glider, Norman Osborn, by the way, as the Green Goblin. So he comes in to basically take revenge as the New Goblin. Um, that's the name, New Goblin. So not he's the new Green Goblin. He's just called New Goblin. So he comes in. Then we also have, you know, Flint Marko, played by Thomas Hayden Church, is transformed into Sandman, is able to control sand, harden it, do whatever, and he's basically looking for money because he has a backstory involving a sick daughter. Um, and then finally we have Venom, or kind of. A black ooze, a symbiote. There's actually more to the comics for that. They call when I think they're called the Clintar. Um, he lands on Earth and attaches itself to Peter at some point, and changes his personality. And soon later, Peter discards it and attaches itself to Eddie Brock, played by Topher Grace. So yeah, there's a lot. That's the one big unfortunate thing is despite again, I think it is fine. It's not like the worst I've seen. It's not like there's not like there's like little I'm sorry, I'm trying to word this correctly. It's I think there is still value into the film. There is still plenty of good stuff to it, but the story, the fact that it's overstuffed with so many characters, new characters that they're setting up, and other characters that they're you know also trying to continue with, especially with Harry Osborn, and then as well as other characters. There's like Gwen Stacy's involved, played by Bryce Dallas Howard, who was later in the Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield. That was a big thing. So in this one, it's supposed to be a big thing. It doesn't. It kind of does, but not enough to really warrant her existence. Um, but yeah, I think what most people are dissatisfied with is the lack of Venom. And yes, Venom does not come into play, not like the Venom form, till like maybe an hour and a half into the film, or 1 hour and 45 minutes later. So yeah, unfortunately that's the case. And even you have Topher Grace playing Eddie Brock, and Eddie Brock is and Topher Grace just feels like a carbon copy of Peter Parker in a way, just different attitude, but same look and build. Rather than going with um, a bigger, tougher guy like yeah, and again I'm blanking. I don't know why I'm blanking. Um, but in any case, um, like a bigger, tougher guy, taller, in a way to kind of offset and make it more intimidating for Spider-Man. And because Venom is one of Spider-Man's greatest villains of all time. Um, I don't know if he's number one necessarily, but he is well remembered as a very intimidating villain, and sometimes anti-hero, depending on where you're looking at the comics. Tom Hardy, that's his name. Um, but yeah, I just remember Tom Hardy. Um, but yeah, they could have had somebody like Tom Hardy, plays Eddie Brock, and Eddie Brock. I remember if when I heard in the comics, he has a very troubled life that he did blame Spider-Man for, which does happen here in the movie, and he does it in a way to gets buffed up, he gets better, and he becomes a legitimate threat to Peter Parker and his life as a whole. And then of course you have the stuff with the symbiote, who you know basically changes his personality. And I think I remember the animated series Spider-Man that delved um, deep into like the psychosis, the his into Peter Parker's mind, fighting between him and the symbiote. So there's there's a lot of things they could have done with this, and unfortunately, they just did not have time to do it. Um, and that's the most unfortunate thing, because I think that's what people really wanted the most, and they got very little of it. Um, let's see. Is there other problems? There are some really stupid moments. I mean, obviously, there's um, emo Peter. I mean, that's a thing that doesn't gel well with like the tone, or the tone is often kind of over the place. Sometimes it plays it serious, other times jokingly. Granted, it's consistent with the first two, but not to degree stupid level degrees, because there's this moment where Pete Parker with the black suit, um, the symbiote, has black hair over one of his eyes, and he's dancing or showing off. He becomes emo Peter. That's what people call him, was emo Peter, because the way he looked. And that's not what I think Venom is. The symbiote was supposed to do. It's not supposed to make him look kind of really silly. That's not the idea. Um, but either they just don't want it. They didn't have time, because they had to throw in you know the Sandman, Flint Marco, who I think Thomas Hayden Church actually does fine, but there's not a ton of time, and plus his story doesn't really have much of a conclusion to really wonder. It leaves a lot of kind of a whole opening, and there's some change into how later in the film, like especially the end, which I mean is good, but it seems pretty sudden that he changes from villain to like sympathetic villain. But we do sympathize him. But I will say he does have a really great moment where he when he becomes a Sandman and you see him transform into, not transform, but you see him trying to collect himself and trying to build himself back up in the body. It's all silent, done by music, little to no dialogue, and we just feel like he's trying to put himself back together, and you can feel a lot like into that moment. It's even the CGI, well, hasn't doesn't quite hold up nowadays, but it's still impressive for what they did. It's one of the great moments in the Spider-Man film that warrants it. Even if it's not as important, you do feel it. Um, for James Franco as the new Goblin comes into play. But of course, unfortunately, while James Franco still does a good job as Harry Osborn, his story, his back with becoming the new Goblin, gets sidelined quite drastically, in fact. But he does have some good action scenes, especially in the beginning where he fights Peter for the first time. So that's really good. Um, the effects, especially, it's still rubbery at times where you look at the faces, but it's a lot better than the first and even the second one. I wouldn't say the action is as good. I don't think any of the action scenes in Spider-Man 3 can compete with the train scene in Spider-Man 2, but it still looks better than the previous Spider-Man films. But that's just my thought. Um, yeah, and I gotta pause. Okay, back. I think the relationship between Peter and Mary Jane is a little bit better, though there is one stupid scene that happens that makes no sense when you think about it. It's like, why did that they do that way? If it was illustrated better, um, as a legitimate threat, because there is a breakup involved, that could have been handled better or could have been thought out more clearly, but it didn't. Um, but I do kind of buy the chemistry now with with Tobey Maguire and Kristen Dunst on screen, and they do have their tiffs a little bit, and especially when it involves Peter being so full of himself because he's all famous, whereas Mary Jane's struggling as an actress. Um, so I'm not saying I'm also Mary Jane's not still like I mentioned in the past two Spider-Man films. Mary Jane, Kristen Dunst. There doesn't seem to be a lot into her character. Not many people like her because she's always like the the thing, that damsel in distress. But I think she has a more developed character now um, than the past two films, but not a ton, not much, I don't think. Um, let's see. I mentioned the action's fine. J.K. Simmons has some really great moments and laughs. The humor is also good. Um, acting and writing's a little bit better. I would say it's still about the same as the second one, but it's a tad bit better. But not a ton or not a lot. Um, the other thing is I don't like I one thing I don't like is they shoehorn in Sandman to be the culprit of killing um, Uncle Ben, because that's in the trailer. So if you've seen the trailer, you know what happens there. Um, I don't I don't know. It feels like it takes away what the previous two films did. Um, and overall, just because we need something to have the Sandman, have something for Peter, especially with the black suit Spider-Man, just to have something out against Flint Marko as Sandman, and it I don't know, it doesn't make a lot of sense or difference, um, or maybe it does. I don't know. I didn't think it worked. It wasn't needed personally. Let's see. I will say, I wish the film could have been split into two parts. Like, um, have the focus be strictly on Harry Osborn and Peter, like trying to not build, but there, because of the fallout that they had after the Spider-Man 2, Pete, and especially with Harry trying to, emulate a lot of what his father did, including the new Goblin suit, the drug, which I don't even know. They show him getting the gas and drug, the drug basically to become this new Goblin, but we don't really see. I don't know if there's any change. It just kind of shows that one scene. It's done. He's not doesn't act as crazy as like Norman Osborn was. So I don't know. They don't really explain it, and it's like they don't have a lot of time. They didn't have a lot of time to do that. But in any case, I wish it was a moment where Harry had to keep fighting Peter often. He keeps losing, but he tries to get better. Like he tries to, you know, increase his strength, his speed, agility, enough to keep up with Peter as Spider-Man. And Peter could be struggling to keep up with him. That's when the black suit comes in. The symbiote comes in and you know, helps him compete with that. But unfortunately, they go so far beyond trying to improve themselves that it's like it's corrupting what they had or what they overall it corrupts their moral or their friendship and stuff like that. So um and that's something that they had to conquer, and that would have been interesting. um so we got a great fight scene, but it could have come back and say, you know I forgive you. And that was one of the messages in this film, is about forgiveness, and which has been done before, but still, it's a really good lesson to learn about forgiving oneself. And then maybe we had Spider-Man 4 with Venom this time and Eddie Brock. And yeah, we could have Eddie Brock in like the first part, where he's trying to get by, and then of course he gets on Peter Parker's nerves and ruins his life, and you know, but we kind of see that build or set up for the next for the second part of Spider-Man 4, if there was one, and that would have you know had more Venom, you know, and it would have pleased a lot of the fans, I would think. That's just my thought. In general, I mean, and granted, and what about the Sandman? I think you could have the Sandman, maybe. I think if I mean, in my personal opinion, how I would feel like the Spider-Man 3 and 4 would have should have panned out. Maybe he could have, in my version, he could have been 4. Um, Personally, I almost wish he wasn't included because so we can have time to develop these characters. And there's even a moment where we even had a character that I don't think, if you're not familiar with Spider-Man at all, there's a character named Kirk Connors who happens to be Peter's professor at the university, who's has only one arm. He becomes a lizard, and we don't really get to see his development till you know it gets rebooted in the Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield. But so we kind of missed out on possibly that. Granted, the effects may have not have been up on par to you know do it, but it could have been. There could have been room. There could have been rooms for it, maybe. Um, and again, it's like Kirk Connors was trying to improve himself to basically give himself an arm or be able to regenerate limbs before he turns himself to a monster. And that would have been on par with my view on what Spider-Man 3 could be, involving Harry Osborn and Peter Parker trying to improve themselves, that they become monsters and as well, that they had to fight their own inner demons, um, and forgive each other and whatnot. But I don't know. That's just my thoughts on how I think the Spider-Man 3, and if there was a Spider-Man 4, how that could have been played out. But I don't know. It's hard to say, but a lot of, because of the studio meddling, Spider-Man 3 wasn't as well received, but I think more people are kind of drifting over to saying they like it enough to say it warrants a watch. And that's what I will say. It is warrant to watch. It's not as good as the first. It's not. It's definitely not as good as the second one, in my opinion. But I think there is still plenty of stuff to enjoy, like the action, the effects. There's still good acting, for a majority of the characters. Some good humor. Um, Relationship between Peter and MJ is better. Um, but because of the plot, the story that's overstuffed to the point, it leaves little room to um, develop at certain points, and you'd be disappointed, especially with little to no Venom in the film. So yeah, I think I would give it 3.5 to kind of be generous. Three and a half. I think there's still a plenty to warrant it, despite some stupid stuff that happens in the film, like emo Peter and the dance scene. But excuse me. But yeah, what are your thoughts on Spider-Man 3? Leave in the comments below. Leave a like or dislike the review if you wish. Feel free to subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell so you can be updated on any more future reviews that I put out. And I will see you guys in the next review. Bye.